When I think back to the early 2000s, I have a lot of fond memories of discovering music that I loved, and in particular Australian music. And one genre that I think is often overlooked in hindsight is the folk rock scene that we got from the early 2000s. This folky and rootsy rock sound was a huge hit in Australia commercially and in the alternative scenes. In this video, I want to look at how and why it became so big and some of the artists that propelled this scene towards the commercial successes that it had. So if we look back firstly into the late 90s, you'll remember that there was a lot of music that was really popular in Australia, which I would call kind of like post-grunge. I'm talking bands like Grinspoon, Silverchair, The Living End, and so on. All pretty heavy stuff with heavy guitars, bombastic drums, loud vocals. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm a freak. This sort of stuff was popular on Triple J and the underground and alternative scenes, as well as commercially a bit too. Although there were a couple of outliers in the alternative music scene in the late 90s in Australia, one being the Whitlams, who were kind of like this jazzy pop rock band who had a really big hit with No Aphrodisiac. There's no aphrodisiac like loneliness. This song hit #1 on the Triple J Hottest 100 of 1998, and it's really kind of unique because all the other songs around it had pretty heavy chuggy guitars, but this one was like a piano jazz ballad. Another band that kind of sounded similar was George, with female vocals that differentiated it, and I think these two artists were kind of softening the ears and getting us ready for the rootsy folk stuff that was about to come. We also had some other really popular underground alternative rock bands that started to dabble in kind of folkier stuff and use acoustic guitars more, with the likes of Powderfinger, of course with their big hits like These Days and My Happiness. My happiness, slowly creeping back. Another band like UMI really started to kind of use the acoustic guitar a lot after they started out as more of like a grungy outfit. I miss you, Loxley. Once it hit about the year 2000, there was one song in particular in Australia that was huge and was kind of going towards this folky sound that I think really prepared our ears for the folk boom, and that song was Not Pretty Enough by Casey Chambers. Am I not pretty enough? Now I know this song was a little bit more country, but that kind of like acoustic guitar and gentleness that crossed between pop and rock was something that I think that not a lot of people were asking for, but when it was given to them commercially, quite enjoyed it. We also had one in particular big legacy folk artist keep putting out great stuff around this time too, that being Paul Kelly with his Ways and Means and Nothing But a Dream albums. And then in 2001, it just took off. Firstly with a song by a guy called Alex Lloyd, which you'll recognize from all those car ads it was in. Now this song hasn't really aged as well, but it was kind of helping us get ready for one of the bigger artists in that scene who was a little bit more niche to the folky roots side, and that was John Butler, or his band, the John Butler Trio. Now John Butler had a growing audience that he was gathering in the local Perth and Fremantle music scene here in Western Australia from his busking, and he'd put out some independent music already, but in 2001 he gained underground national success, in particular with his song Better Man. So better man, I am since I am, which did pretty well in the Hottest 100 of that year. Now I'm pretty sure that John Butler was good friends with another West Australian rootsy band called the Waifs, who after him pushed their way into the alternative national scene too, and got a lot of attention on Triple J. Their song London Still charted pretty well in the Hottest 100 of 2002. I'm in London still. I'm in. And now all of a sudden, a lot of people were into this sound. And I'm talking like, you know, acoustic guitars, a little bit of piano, gentle drumming. And in 2003, there was an international artist that I believe really just blew the doors open for this genre, and it made it more commercially popular here in this country too, and that artist was Jack Johnson.
He just wanders around, unaffected by.
And he actually became like this really popular figure around the early 2000s, and it felt like every second person who I knew growing up that was learning the guitar or just like dabbling around on an acoustic guitar would learn Jack Johnson songs and try to show off to his friends by playing Jack Johnson songs. I'll put my hand up and say I was one of those people who did that too.
My cousin knows how to play guitar. He can play Jack Johnson.
And we saw a lot of Aussies try and follow what he was doing, and of course John Butler pressed on in 2003, releasing one of his biggest songs, that being Zebra. We had a guy pop up who I kind of like to call Diet Jack Johnson, that being Pete Murray.
Got my fingers burned.
Now he did really well on both Triple J and commercial radio stations. And another guy kind of doing that John Butler-ish sort of stuff was Xavier Rudd.
Well, let me be now. Well, let me be calm.
In 2004, we saw the emergence of another artist, and that was Missy Higgins.
And doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that hit so close to home?
Her song Scar and the album Sound of White were such big commercial successes in this country, and I think she just took Australia by storm. People could not get enough of Missy Higgins. She was just everywhere around that time. Commercial and alternative radio stations, winning ARIA awards. Her songs were on TV shows and ads. Another song that really stood out to me in 2004 in this genre was It's Too Late by Evermore. Now I know technically they were a New Zealand band, but I think they kind of did move to Australia once they started getting big. Now when 2005 came around, I personally felt like we had some of the best folk music coming out of this country. We had Ben Lee release his album Awake is the New Sleep, and this is a guy who's been around for many years before and was kind of playing edgy alternative pop stuff, but he took his sound to a folk direction that just connected with people so much, especially his song Catch My Disease, which everyone just loved.
So please.
The lead singer of Powderfinger, Bernard Fanning, released his debut solo album called Tea and Sympathy, which I personally think is potentially one of the greatest Australian folk albums of all time, and an extremely underrated album. I know it did win Album of the Year at the ARIAs, but I don't think people talk about this album enough still. It's just an immaculate piece of work, and almost just as good, if not better, than Powderfinger albums.
And I just wanna wish you well.
Pete Murray obviously released his second album, See the Sun, which is another big commercial hit. And as the years went on, we continued to see more and more artists pop up playing this alternative folk roots rock sound. We had the likes of Claire Bowditch, Lior, Sarah Blasco, Jeffrey Gurumul Yunupingu, Ash Grunwald, and a band called The Beautiful Girls. And towards the end of the decade, we saw a couple more artists pop up, like Josh Pike. Boy and Bear did some really cool stuff and popped up to win an ARIA for Album of the Year, and it just really cemented itself as essentially one of, if not the most popular subgenre in Australia of that decade. As the new decade rolled around, with all the scaffolding that had been built up for the Australian roots rock scene, we had probably two of the biggest songs and artists to come out of this country pop up in the early parts of the 2010s. Number one being Angus and Julia Stone with their song Big Jet Plane.
Gonna take her for a ride on a big jet plane.
And number two being Vance Joy and his song Riptide. Now these two songs were huge commercial hits all over the world, and they showed how successful this genre of music can be for Australian artists. So why did this become such a popular genre in the 2000s in Australia? Well, it's hard to put my finger on, but I think that it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the softening of the ears. Trends in music kind of come and go, and people don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. When a new thing pops up that's good, people are attracted to it and they want to hear more of it. I essentially think that's what was happening here in Australia, that people wanted to kind of get away from that heavy stuff and were liking the idea of settling their ears down to something more gentle and palatable. I think folk rock as well really goes with Australian culture too. When I think of Australian culture, some things that come to mind are our country, the sparse landscapes that we have, and sometimes when you can articulate that with music, it's better served with an acoustic guitar as opposed to an electric. I think it was also a lot easier for solo musicians to get into this folk stuff because you could just pick up a guitar and start doing your own songs, singer-songwriter style at open mics, and develop an audience that way. Getting a band together with drums and electric guitars and amps is a lot of hassle and hard work. Sometimes just bringing you and your guitar along to get it done does the job. But overall, I just wanted to put it out there that I think this type of music that came out of Australia was awesome, and I don't think it gets enough discussion anymore, and I want to just make sure that we remember how good that Australian folk rock culture was in the 2000s. Thanks for checking out this video, everyone. If you want to see more about Australian music soon, I'll be back with more videos, so like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.